Hosts Bob Dancer and Richard Munchkin. Bob Dancer is America's premier video poker writer and teacher. He's written 10 books, including Video Poker for the Intelligent Beginner and the best-selling $1 Million Video Poker. He helped develop the computer software Video Poker for Winners, and in 2004 he was inducted into the Video Poker Hall of Fame. Richard Munchkin has been a professional advantage player for over 30 years and is in the Blackjack Hall of Fame. His book, Gambling Wizards, Conversations with the World's Greatest Gamblers, is a testament to the many ways you can succeed at gambling. The goal of the show is that you'll be a more knowledgeable gambler tomorrow than you were yesterday. And now, here are Bob and Richard.
Good evening. Welcome to Gambling with an Edge. My name's Bob Dancer.
And I'm Richard Munchkin.
Our guest tonight is Bill Robertie, a backgammon player who has won the World Championship twice. He's also helped Dan Harrington write several best-selling books on poker. He's also written on chess. We're going to be talking to Bill right away. So, Bill Robertie, welcome to Gambling with an Edge.
Glad to be there.
Thank you for being here. In live poker, a 10-2 offsuit is known as a Doyle Brunson because he won 2 different World Series of Poker bracelets almost 40 years ago, starting with this nothing kind of hand. Years ago, I remember you making a claim that a certain position in backgammon was the Bill Robertie position. How can a position on a backgammon board be a Bill Robertie position?
Well, it has to be connected not just with one good story, but with sort of a whole series of them. There was a position that kept recurring in my games, very oddly enough, every few years, a specific position in the end game where one player was a very large favorite, almost exactly 3-1. And the first time this position came up, I was on the side that was favored to win, and instead I lost 16 points. And I was too bad. These things happen. It didn't bother me all that much, but I remembered the position. It was kind of interesting. A lot of players would have thought that one side was a much bigger favorite than that, but in fact they weren't. Then about 3 years later, also in a money game in Boston, the same position came up. And once again, I was on the side that was a 3-1 favorite, and again I lost 16 points. And I thought, gee, that's kind of
what a big
freaky.
Loser you are.
That shouldn't happen like that. And then years passed, and I was in the semifinals of the World Championship in Monte Carlo in '87. And lo and behold, the same position arose a third time, but this time I was on the losing side. And this time I won. And again, I won 16 points, which basically locked up the semifinal match and got me to the finals, which I won the next day. So after that, I said, the next time I do a book, I got to write this position down and stick it in there and just claim it as my own because it belongs to me now. And so the story is actually very much like Doyle's, winning 2 crucial hands in different World Series of Pokers with the same mediocre cards. I felt like, I knew that story at the time. That had happened. His book, Super System, had already come out. So I said, okay, this is my position here. I claim this. And I stuck it in Advanced Backgammon when it came out in, I think, 1991, and it's been there ever since.
So what is the state of backgammon today, Bill?
It's pretty much it's actually growing. I was going to say steady state, but no, it's the tournament attendance this year has actually been up. It was up last year. I think what we're seeing, games they have a little faddishness to them. They get popular, they get incredibly popular, then popularity goes down as people who came in sort of lose interest, go away. But they'll reach a kind of steady state. They'll stay there for a long, long time. That's kind of where backgammon has been really since the end of the 80s. It's a popular game, but you just don't see much about it because it's not trendy for whatever reason. But the last few years we've seen a definite uptick in tournament attendance, and I kind of attribute it to a couple of things. Players who were active in the 70s and 80s who are now coming back to it, and a lot of ex-poker players who tried poker. It didn't work for them for one reason or another, but they liked, a little bit of the lifestyle. They liked going to poker tournaments. They liked the excitement. They liked hanging out. And so I think a number of those people are saying now, hey, let me give this backgammon a try. There's supposed to be some skill to that too. Let me see if it works better for me than poker. We're starting to see people like that come into backgammon tournaments.
Now, I learned backgammon in... Oops, I cut you
Go
off.
ahead, Bob.
I learned backgammon in the early 70s and played until just about the time your advanced backgammon book came out. And we didn't have computers back then.
Mm-hmm.
Today, they have artificial intelligence computers of various sorts. They might call them neural computers.
The backgammon programs are neural nets, which is a specialized kind of artificial intelligence programming.
All right, so there's a Snowy, there's a Jellyfish, there's a New, there's an Extreme. What's the difference between these programs?
They came out in that order, and Jellyfish was wonderful when it first came out. It was the only one you had, so you worked with that. There were obvious problems with its style that good players noticed. I mean, we didn't think that Jellyfish represented optimal backgammon, but it was certainly very good for analyzing a lot of kinds of positions. Then Snowy came along in 1998, and Snowy was really good. When Snowy came out, there was no player in the world that could beat it. It was that good. Snowy kept improving. They improved it for many years. GNU, I don't actually ever use. It's an open source program. It was kind of buggy when it first came out, and since Snowy was already available, I never got into it. And Extreme Gammon is the latest and greatest. With Extreme Gammon, I don't know that the underlying algorithm is better than Snowy, but it's optimized to use today's quad-core chips and stuff, which are much, much faster than the chips that were in the the Windows PCs back in 1998, 2000, 2002. So it can do its analysis much, much faster than Snowy could, and as a result, instead of being limited to 3-ply analysis, which Snowy could do, basically looking 3 moves ahead, it can do 4-ply, 5-ply, and it can even do these things with little tiny mini rollouts stuck in there, which improve the accuracy a lot. And then, of course, you can do rollouts much, much faster. So Extreme Gammon is sort of what everybody uses now if they're serious about the game. My company still sells Jellyfish and stuff, and I think for a beginner, Jellyfish would be fine. But if you want the latest and greatest, you get Extreme Gammon.
I also, like Bob, started back in the 70s, and I think I first met you, Bill, in maybe about 1980. You made a trip out to Vegas. Mm-hmm. But I'm wondering, back then certain players had the big reputations, as being the best players in the world. And I'm wondering now, are people going back and running games that were recorded back then to see how well players back then actually played compared to what the computers are saying now? Indeed they are.
And in fact, I just finished a rollout of a match from 1981. Which I run them. I run them myself for a number of reasons. One is just curiosity. I want to know how well did we play back then, because basically we were pretty impressed with ourselves, and we thought, we knew how this game was played.
Some of you still are.
And, right, today's top players, they're impressed with themselves too. So I was curious. I mean, I knew objectively the standard of play had gone up. There's no question about that. But I was curious how much it went up and how much had some of the top players like McGreal really understood back then. And the answer is kind of interesting. The best players of 1980 were very good. The best players today are better. But if you took let's use McGreal as an example. If you took McGreal of 1980 and you dropped him in a contemporary tournament with the best players in the world, he wouldn't be the best, but he would be in the top, let's say, the top quarter of the field. He played very well. Not everybody who was thought to be a good player then did play well, but you can see a subset of them who really sort of got it, and they could walk right into a tournament today knowing no more than they did then, and they would be formidable opponents. Not today's world class. Pardon?
Do any other names from back in that time stand out with McGrill as the really top players?
Yeah. Kent Goulding, Mike Sankiewicz. I think Kent was on your show a few weeks ago.
Yes, he was.
Mike Sankiewicz, Joe Dweck. There were some very good players then. And there were players then who were thought to be good who were vastly overrated. I won't name names, but there was a real discrepancy in those days between, there was a group of players all thought to be good. They had different styles. People thought, well, isn't that interesting? You got all these styles in backgammon. But the objective fact was some of them were just way better than the others. And, there were players then who people would say about them, well, this guy's a good money player, but he hasn't really won a lot of tournaments yet. Well, the reason he hadn't won a lot of tournaments yet was often he just didn't play that well. But money games, that wasn't necessarily the case. As long as he was better than the guy who was playing and knew how to pick him, he could have been very successful. But in tournaments, everybody got tossed in together. You had to play. There were some very overrated players. And there were some players who, like I say, they could walk into a tournament today and do just fine.
Were there any players that people didn't realize were actually really great players?
Yes.
But just didn't have the reputation?
Yes. I'll give you two names. Mike Valentine, who died, I think almost 20 years ago. He won a number of tournaments back then, and people thought, well, this guy's just incredibly lucky. But he wasn't. He played a style which any modern player would recognize. Basically racing and blitzing. He didn't spend a whole lot of time trying to, build primes or drop back into back games. He just played a really sound game. Two other players who, again, had styles that were looked upon with skepticism, but nowadays we would say, hey, these guys are good. Jim Pascoe. Jersey Jim Pascoe, as he was called, and Al Hodis, who was a New Yorker. He didn't play much outside of New York. The New Yorkers knew about him. He was very good. Deceptively good, because they weren't appreciated at the time.
Yeah. Well, actually, I remember having a lot of respect for Jim Pascoe, although he did sometimes, he really liked to specialize in back games and sometimes would kind of go crazy and deliberately throw himself into back games. But
he did, but he was a really good back game player. I mean, he could get in, he could get out, he could, he wouldn't get married to a back game if something else came up. A lot of people played back games in those days, more so than you would see today. He was the best of the bunch. And he was so good that it was okay that he drifted into back games a little more than he should, because he really knew how to play them.
Now, you mentioned Joe Dweck, and I don't know, you may be the most prolific backgammon author, or is there anybody who's written more than you on backgammon?
Well, Danny Kleinman was years ago. But
Danny Kleinman would have me topped by a book or two, I would say.
Okay, well, anyway, the first book of an annotated match that I recall coming out was your book of the World Championship match between Joe Dweck and Lee Ganud.
Yes.
And that was a great book, and that match was particularly controversial because a lot of people thought that Joe Dweck threw the match because of his relationships with bookmakers in England. Mm-hmm. So now when you did the book, I think you refrained from getting into any of that in the book, as I recall, right? You didn't bring that up, or did you?
I did not bring that up. for two reasons. One, if it were true, it would have cast a bad light on backgammon. I was not interested in doing that. But also, I'd analyzed the match deeply, and I didn't think it was true. Joe played basically the way Joe plays. He wasn't doing anything unusual. I have other matches of his to compare it to. He wasn't playing worse than usual. He played pretty well, and he I would say on balance, he played the better of the two. But he wasn't lucky, and he lost the match. But there was no evidence to play. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, have you gone back and analyzed your own analysis, run that match through the computers, and seen your own analysis and how good that was in that book?
No, I haven't specifically done that. I guess now we've had this conversation, I probably will, just out of curiosity's sake. But I analyzed it a lot at the time, and you got to understand that the errors that crop up in the match were mostly doubling errors. But Joe's checker play was of a really high order for that time. He handled the cube sort of like Lee handled the cube a little bit, and like the Europeans in particular handled it in those days. They were very cautious in matches. They dropped positions where they thought they could get gammoned, positions which look ridiculous to a modern player, but that was how they played. The Americans were much better with the cube as a group. The Americans were aggressive doublers, and we understood at least somewhat that you could take a lot of positions that looked a little dangerous. But the Europeans didn't do that, and Joe was the best of the Europeans, but he still had some of that in his game, and it actually probably cost him the match if he had been a better taker. Lee was giving him doubles that were easy takes. But like I say, this was not unusual for the period, and I was comparing Joe's play to Joe's play at the time, and I said, no, this is a legitimate match. There's nothing weird happening here. So, I mean, I know the source of those rumors. They came from people who had bets in the other direction and lost them. They were pretty upset, but the evidence I've seen does not support it. I think the match was legit.
We talked about the computer programs. You also could learn backgammon from books. You have several, and there are other good books out there. So if somebody wanted 2 or 3 books to start learning to play backgammon, what would you recommend?
Well, if you're a beginner and you're starting out, in all honesty, I would recommend the series of beginner books that I wrote back in the 90s for Cardozo Publishing. Backgammon for Winners is the first one. That's real elementary, just teaches you the rules and gives you some sample games so you can see what's going on. Then the next book after that is called Backgammon for Serious Players, which, again, is some annotated games, just fairly complicated games where we talk about everything in depth. And then I finished it up with a problem book called 501 Essential Backgammon Problems, which kind of breaks the game down into sections and gives you some problems in each section and kind of shows you what's going on. So I think those 3 taken together make a real good starter series. That was our goal when we put that together, and I think it worked out pretty well. There are other good books out there, to take you beyond that, books for more advanced players. A friend of mine named Walter Trice, who died 3 or 4 years ago, wrote a terrific book called Backgammon Boot Camp, which covers a whole lot of stuff, some of it for beginners, but a lot of it much more advanced. Kit Woolsey wrote a very nice book called New Ideas in Backgammon, just a good look at difficult problems. I did a book a few years ago called Modern Backgammon that kind of looks, it's a kind of an overview of the game, kind of looks at checker plays, and tries to see why the bots do what they do and how you can learn from them. So there's a fair amount out there that that somebody could learn from. You could start from scratch and just through books, just bring yourself up several levels.
But really, I mean, to get good as a player now, wouldn't you recommend buying Extreme Gammon and playing against the machine?
Yes. I would say that's real important. Now, the problem you have when you play the bot is the bot doesn't tell you why it's doing what it's doing. So you may have total faith it's doing the right things, but you may look at what it does and sort of be baffled. You know, it's leaving blots, there it's playing safe,
Sure.
Here it's going into a back game, there it's not. Why is any of this happening? It's hard to figure all that out on your own, without anyone to ask questions of. So the books help. Some coaching helps. You may have to ask around, especially if you're on your own doing this. I mean, those of us who learned in the 70s when you guys did, and I started learning the game in 76. We were kind of lucky because the game was very popular and there were so many people around trying to learn it. You had people you could bounce ideas off of and ask questions of, and if you were lucky, you could play a good player and maybe ask them some questions afterwards. And some of the good players were very approachable, and some weren't. But the point is, you could do a lot of what today's poker players are doing. You could just sit down with your buddies and you're all playing the same game and just bounce ideas off each other until something starts to click. That's a very good thing to do as you're developing as a player.
Are the best players today American, European, or none of the above?
None of the
Japanese?
above. Yes. The best players are Japanese. And believe me, 15 years ago, I never would have believed it if you'd told me that. But the Americans dominated from, the 60s through the early 90s. And I mean really dominated. If you made a list of the top 20 players in the world, at one point they would have all been Americans. It was that clear. Then the Germans started developing some good players. Then the Danes and the Swedes. And so by the late 90s, it was kind of the Germans, the Scandinavian countries where, you had to say close to half of the good players would have come from that area. Gus Hansen, who's now a great poker player, I first met him when he was a great backgammon player. He was part He was part of Zobo's crew, and he started out as a money player and then learned tournament backgammon before he eventually disappeared, and we discovered, he went to poker. Well, who would have thought that? So he was one of the group of Danish players that just got very, very good. But then in the 2000s, the Japanese just got real serious about the game, and now the top 10 players, I'd say 3 or 4 are Japanese.
How much are you playing, Bill? How are you still playing a lot?
Yeah, actually, I'm playing. My playtime now is essentially all backgammon. I played poker a lot from the time Danny and I started working on the first Harrington and Hold'em book, which was 03. It came out at the end of 04, but we started work in August of 03. So I had to play poker because even though Danny was the poker expert, and my job was more or less to transcribe his thoughts into readable prose. Still in all, I could do a much better job of that if I could play. So I think one reason the first and second Harrington books turned out so well is because when I started writing them, I was a beginner learning from him. So I knew all the things beginners were thinking about, and I could pose them to him. They could go right in the book. And then as I improved, now I was thinking about the things that intermediates were thinking about. And so I could ask them those questions, and then that could go in the book. So a lot of people come up to us now and say, wow, this book, I feel like it was written just for me. And the answer is, well, actually it was written just for me, but I'm glad it carried over.
Yeah, but not a lot of beginners have IQs of 200 and all this world championship experience in the background. So just one or two wouldn't meet those criteria.
Well, that may be true, but I think it's very readable if you're a beginner starting out in poker. I think the first two, three really Harrington and Hold'em books we're very proud of them. I mean, I think they were a really good introduction.
You should be. I thought they were really. I mean, when people ask me for poker books, those are the books that I mostly recommend. I thought they were really well written and very easy to understand. So, and
yeah,
do you have another one coming out?
Yeah, we're actually probably finished next week. A book called Harrington on Modern Tournament Poker, which is kind of an updated look at tournament poker, taking into account the fact that, you know, most of the players in a tournament now, or at least most of the good players, are much, much more aggressive than they were 10 years ago. And that creates an entirely different dynamic. Whether you want to be an aggressive player or whether you're just more comfortable being a tight player, you have to do things differently than we taught you in those books in order to survive in these tournaments. If you're playing, you know, in your local tournament, you got a home game or something going on, well, those books will be fine. But if you want to hop into the World Series of Poker, I mean, I played in it for several years, and the change from the first time I played, which was '06, to the last time I played, which was last year, 2012, I mean, I could see the game, you know, evolving every single year and getting tougher. So we wanted to kind of write a book that, you know, spoke to the players who were, you know, trying to play in tough tournaments and needed, you know, some handle on why does the game look the way it does now and what should you do about it. And that's kind of what this book is about.
Now, did backgammon there had become a lot of action for backgammon online, like there was with poker. When poker got shut down online, did the backgammon get shut down as well, or is that still available?
No, that was shut down as well, and as far as I'm concerned, that's all for the better. The backgammon really doesn't adapt well to the online world. It's very much a game you want to play live. You play backgammon for any significant money online, and you're going to be up against people who are just cheating. You know, they're going to have bots, or at the very least, they're going to be really strong players. So, you know, if you're a beginner at poker and you hop into the 1 cent, 2 cent game on PokerStars, if you live in Canada or Europe, you're fine. You know, you'll learn the game there. You'll probably very quickly, if you have any aptitude for the game, become a winner, and you can sort of slowly build your bankroll. But if you're a beginner at backgammon and you try to play online for money, you have zero chance of coming out ahead. So I tell my pupils when I'm, you know, when somebody comes to me for lessons, okay, the first thing you're going to do is you're not going to even if you can find a site to play for money online, don't do it. You know, find a club, play real people that you can see. Don't fall into this trap. Chess is the same game. You know, if the bots play a game very well, you do not want to play it for money online. You just don't. It's crazy. And so you got to, you know, poker, it's fine. I mean, the bots can't play No Limit Hold'em yet. So online poker is just fine. I played it for years, and, you know, it was a source of a huge number of problems in the various Harrington books and stuff that we talked about, and I had a lot of fun, and I made money. But, you know, backgammon, no, stay away. Not a good idea.
You know, speaking of the cheating, there have been quite a number of chess scandals where people are, you know, using hidden computers.
I just got my latest copy of New in Chess and read it through, and yeah, sure enough, here's some other clown who can barely play, obviously using a bot somehow, and the only question is, well, how is he getting the information? Yeah, that's a real problem in chess.
But has that same thing moved into the backgammon world?
No. Theoretically, it could, but it hasn't happened, I think, partly because it would be very hard to transmit a backgammon position to some remote location where someone is using a bot and then get the information back to the player in time for him to make use of it. And that's not an easy problem to solve, you know, because it's harder to describe backgammon moves sort of in a real shorthand. It's something backgammon has to be careful about. One of the things that's been discussed recently is, a lot of backgammon players like to use headphones and listen to music. And the ones who are doing it are listening to music, but that's not always going to be the case. And I'm very much in favor, as chess has already done. You can't have headphones on if you're playing. Forget about it. You have to adapt to the world that we live in, and that's an adaptation you have to make. And I know some backgammon players who've told me, if they ban headphones, I'll never play again. And my answer to them is, well, nice knowing you. But that's a change that hasn't happened yet, and it has to happen real soon.
Will there be rules banning Google Glasses?
Yeah, definitely.
But are the rules?
That's absolutely obvious. I mean, you can't have some computer beaming its output right on your eyeball. That's not going to work.
Might be noticeable.
Yeah. No, Google Glasses will have to be a big no-no in the games playing world.
But until headphones actually do get banned, it would seem to be relatively easy to put a camera somewhere on that headphone to see the board.
Well, it's a good reason to ban them. I mean, there's basically no reason to allow them. You've got players who claim, well, I can't really concentrate on backgammon unless I have soothing music going, to which I reply, oh, poor baby, get used to it. This is just not, in the modern world, this cannot be part of the game.
Yeah. So when I used to play, Bill, there were bars in lots and lots of cities where you could find action, either bars or private clubs, bridge clubs, things like that, where you could go and find backgammon action for money. Mm-hmm. Are there still places to go play for money, like the old Mayfair in New York and the Cavendish in Chicago and L.A.?
There's a club in L.A., there's a club in Chicago where they have regular shoeettes. In New York, I don't want to say there are no public clubs. There may be one, and there are people who sort of meet either in the park or in some of these indoor atriums that you find all over New York City. And then there'll be kind of a regular shoeette going on. There's one in Bryant Park most of the time if the weather's not too bad. But that's not like it used to be. Most of the actual private clubs in New York, the men's clubs on the Upper East Side and some places, Princeton Club, Harvard Club, places like that, those are completely private clubs. You can only get in there if you're a member. And there are shoeettes going on in some of those clubs for fairly high stakes, which is actually exactly what the backgammon scene in New York was like in the 60s and the 50s. Backgammon was sort of kept alive for decades because it was the gambling game of choice among the wealthy New Yorkers who belonged to these clubs. And in fact, the first tournaments in the 60s were made up almost exclusively of these folks. People played in the Tennis and Racket Club of New York or Miami or Washington or these places. Basically, the scene has come almost full circle to the point where that is sort of where the action would be today, in clubs that are membership only.
How many backgammon players today would you estimate make $50,000 a year more from gambling at backgammon?
A small handful, maybe half dozen or less, and their income would vary a lot from year to year. I would not recommend it as a career choice.
Yeah, that's sad. How many tournaments a year do you play? And do you play in the foreign? Do you go to the tournaments in Japan and Europe?
No, Europe is just financially kind of out of the question. If you want to go there on vacation and play a tournament, well, fine. But in terms of, you could make serious money going to European tournaments in the 80s, for example. It was wonderful. But nowadays, hotels are $300-400 a night. Airfare is doubled from what it used to be. It just doesn't fit. I figured out the other day, if I were to go to Monte Carlo, I would have to finish in the semifinals to break even on my cost of the trip, just on the airfare, hotel room, and entry fee in the tournament. I've got to be a semifinalist, and that's fairly appalling. But the American tournaments are great. I play in I try to play at least a half a dozen every year, maybe more, and they're terrific. They're in nice hotels. American hotel rates are dirt cheap compared to what they are in Europe, and you can fly around the country for not too much money. So I'm unlike the 80s when I spent a whole lot of time traveling to Europe. Nowadays I'm totally an American player.
Now you've written about backgammon and chess and poker. Now they're all games, but backgammon there's a highly probability sense to it because it's a roll of the dice and what's going to happen over the next several moves. Chess has very little probability to it, so it would seem to be very different outlooks. So
no, chess is also a probabilistic game, but there is no obvious source of randomness, so people don't notice that it's a probabilistic game. But in fact, it's as probabilistic as backgammon,
really?
But in a different way. I'll give you an analogy to show. Well, first of all, I'll give you the evidence. Let's suppose Gary Kasparov, let's say, he's retired, but let's suppose he's playing chess. He's a 2,800 player, and suppose he goes up against some grandmaster, and it was a 2,600 player. Well, if they play a lot of games over period of time, and you ignore the draws, Kasparov's going to win. Of the decisive games, he's going to win 3 out of 4. Pretty reliably, 3 out of 4 over time. He's not going to win them all, even though he's clearly the better player. He's going to win 3 out of 4. If he plays somebody that he's 400 points better, he's 2,800, say he plays a 2,400 player, he'll win close, but not 100%. He'll win, 90-odd%. But the other guy will win a few. Why is this happening? Because these look very much like if you put two backgammon players up against each other playing 25-point matches, you'd see the same distribution. You'd see the better player winning a certain percentage, and it would be a pretty steady percentage over time as long as their skill remained constant. So if you step back, let's put it this way, if you stuck these players in black boxes, and all you knew from the outside was that over here in box number 1, the results go win, win, loss, win, 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 loss, win, loss. And over here in box number 2, the results go win, win, loss, win, 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 loss. Okay. Which box has the 2 chess players? Which box has the 2 backgammon players? You can't tell the difference. You're just getting these strings of results, and somebody's winning most of them, but not all. So it's obvious why it's happening in backgammon, because you have this sort of random, you have the dice going on. Why is it happening in chess? Well, here's the answer. Chess is kind of like, imagine that it's dark and you have 2 people with flashlights. And one guy has a real big flashlight with a wide beam, and the other guy has a little teeny flashlight with a narrow beam. And here it's dark, and out in front of them is a little forest. And in the forest is some treasure, hidden. And you'd say to each player, okay, you 2 guys go in the forest with your flashlights, and the first one to find the treasure wins. Well, the guy with the big flashlight is a favorite to find the treasure first. But it's no guarantee, because the other guy could luck his way and find it instead. And a game of chess is like that. You look at this position, and there are all these variations that kind of string out in front of you. I could do this, or I could do that, I could do that, and I've only got time to analyze 3 of these, and if I do this, blah, 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 and I do that. You're searching this tree of possibilities. And depending on how fast you think and how much you know about the game, your tree search is more efficient. But it's not guaranteed to get you to the best answer. The other guy, who's maybe he's clumsy and he doesn't think as fast as you, and he doesn't know as much about the game, he could still luck into the main variation almost by chance. That's where the chance in chess comes from. It's entirely invisible, and in fact, you might be a little uncomfortable even referring to it as chance. But that's really what's going on. Two people basically searching a tree and searching it at different speeds, but they're still trying to find the main line, the line that describes correct play on both sides. The better player mostly searches it better, but not always. And that makes chess a probabilistic game, and that means it's got a lot in common with these other games.
But the reason that backgammon is a tremendous gambling game and chess isn't is that there's just enough luck from the dice that the bad players think they got unlucky, but the good players win the money. Whereas in chess, everybody knows the other guy's just the better player.
Right. In when the disparity is huge in chess, it's not a gambling game at all. I mean, the better player has such an enormous edge that he wins all the time. And in fact, if you put a master up against a beginner, the beginner quickly realizes, I have absolutely no chance here. Whereas in backgammon, you put a top backgammon player against somebody who's essentially a beginner, and they start playing. The beginner thinks he's playing a weak player because he sees this opponent doing all sorts of weird, stupid-looking stuff, and this guy who's obviously a fish keeps winning. And the beginner says, "Well, just give me enough time, I'll take this guy." That makes it a fantastic gambling game. Of course, the better player looks at the fish and says, "Well, he's a fish, and I'm just going to stay here and play all night."
If somebody wanted to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
Well, they could go to my website, which is thegammonpress, all one word, .com, thegammonpress.com, and they can buy books there, or they can contact me through that and say, I'd like some coaching, or I'd like this or that, and that'd be the easiest way.
So what kind of things does thegammonpress.com cover? So you do have books, you do have software?
We sell books and software now.
Do you have matches for sale?
We do have matches for sale. I'm going to be revamping it because after I finish this current poker book, I'm going to be doing a backgammon book or two, and also basically revamping the website, putting some videos on there, doing kind of lots of interesting stuff. So it'll look very different a year from now than it does now. But mostly we sell most of the backgammon books that are in print. So you can find a lot of what you would want right there.
I know that I don't know if you were involved with Kent when he put a lot of time and effort into trying to develop a backgammon rating system for the players.
That was the mid-'80s.
Yeah, now I understand that they kind of analyze players by how they analyze their matches and look at how many mistakes per game they make versus the computer. How does that work?
That's right. They do something. You could do this in chess too if you wanted. What you do is you take a match and you basically run it through the computer. Extreme Gammon is very good for this, although I actually like Snowy because Snowy has a better user interface. But either one, it doesn't matter. You run it through the bot, and the bot comes back and it says, okay, the bottom player made X number of errors and X number of blunders, and overall his average error per move, averaged over all the moves in the match, was some number. Let's say it was 5. And what that 5 stands for is, to be technical, it stands for millipoints of equity per move. So in other words, if your error rate is 5, it means every move on average you sacrifice 5 millipoints to your opponent in error. And then the bot does the same thing for the other guys. So you can say, okay, in this match, player A, his error rate was 5, and player B, his error rate was 8, and therefore, there you are. 5 played better than 8. And now there's a lot of noise in this. Your error rate over several matches will actually vary a lot. But, you do enough matches, 20, 30, 40, it starts to average in on some number, and there you go.
And are cube decisions included in that number as well?
Yeah, the bots will tell you sort of how much of your error was due to cube errors and how much was due to checker errors. On average, I think your cube represents, for me at least, when I analyze stuff, my cube represents about a third to a quarter of my total error, and the rest comes from checker plays. And that sounds intuitively about right. Cube decisions, you can make big errors, but you don't get a lot of them in the match. You're doing checker plays all the time, even though many of them are routine. So overall, the sheer number of checker plays swamps the amount of error contained in the cube decision. We used to argue a lot about this back, I remember, in the 70s and 80s, like, if a guy who was a great checker player played a guy who made more checker errors but handled the cube better, who would win. And I think the general consensus back then was that, excuse me, that cube play was more important, but the bots have sort of scotched that. Checker play, the sheer number of checker plays overwhelms the number of cube errors.
At the start of a game, the cube is at 1. It actually says 64, but it's at 1.
Mm-hmm.
And say near the end of the game, it might be at 4 or 8. Would the same mistake at the end of the game when the cube was at 8 count the same against you as when the cube was at 1? Or is it 8 times as bad?
No, it'd be 8 times as bad. You mean in terms of how the bots calculate stuff?
Yeah, so it's multiplied by the current cube level, whatever the error.
Correct. Now, I should say 8 cubes are extremely rare in all games. They probably represent no more than 1%. Most games end at 1 or 2. Even 4s are a little unusual. 8s are really unusual.
Well, you just lost 16 3 times in one story.
Well, now you know why I named it the Robertie position. You can imagine how unusual that is.
All right. We thank you, Bill Robertie. This has been very informative. Thank you for being on the air. We hope to talk to you again someday.
Okay, sure. Give me a call.
All righty. Munch, what did we learn today?
Well, we learned, it's funny, I've really thought about, going back and playing some backgammon, just, more for entertainment than to make money. And it sounds like, from what Bill said, a lot of people are starting to do that. So I probably see a lot of old friends. So,
Yeah,
and I'm sure I definitely will pick up his new poker book, the new Dan Harrington book. I thought the first Harrington books were really, really good. So,
yeah, it's like I was a decent club level player when I quit the game in the 90s, but that probably in today's game when everybody else is using these bots is like beginner level. So whatever history I have is worthless in terms of.
Well, hey, maybe you and I together will go to the Vegas backgammon club some night, and we could always play intermediate.
Well, I would actually be a little bit worried about playing you. So you're going to have to spot me a 3-1. Okay. The South Point has more than 10,000 games, returning more than 99%. That's more than anybody else. In September, there are swipe and win events Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Play 200 points and swipe and earn prizes ranging from 2,500 points, which is worth $7.50, up to $25 or $50 in free play. Generally speaking, if you get big mailers, you tend to get the bigger prizes when you do the swipes. If you get small or no mailers, you tend to get the 2,500 points or maybe a lunch or breakfast buffet. To me, the biggest prize is double points, but it expires on the night you earn it. Last Tuesday, I actually went in the morning, swiped, and I got double points, but I had the day booked out. And so even though it was the most valuable one, I couldn't use it. So it was rather disappointing that was the day I got it. But I will swipe again this next time, and maybe I'll get it again, and then I will play. They have hot seat Sundays from noon to 9 p.m., where $500 is awarded every 15 minutes. And free video poker classes will begin this coming Tuesday, noon, in the showroom, September 10th. First class will be Jacks or Better. There are 10 separate classes over 11 weeks. 1 week I'm going to be cruising to Bermuda, but it is a slightly different class mix than we've had recently. So they're somewhat different game. All the games have been taught before, but some of them not recently. So if you're going to be in town and you're interested, check out the schedule at bobdancer.com. At the Palms, this weekend is the first one of their 102,000 Great Gridiron giveaway. Top prize Friday and Saturday evenings at 8 p.m. will be up to $8,000. Now, this is an athletic contest of sorts where you need to throw a football through a hole. The hole's 12, 16 inches in diameter, something like that. And you get to choose whether you're throwing it from 10 feet away, 15 feet away, or 20 feet away. If you throw it through 10 feet away, you get $3,500, 15 feet away, $5,000, 20 feet away, $8,000. If you miss from any of these, you get $2,500. Now, purses 2, 3, 4, and 5 who are drawn, you get to be the cheering section or the coaching team. You're going to get 15% of whatever first place got. So if you can coach him into getting $8,000, well, you get $1,200. If he ends up missing, you get 15% of $2,500, which is $375. Last year I approached it, and I thought throwing underhand was best, and I wrote about it in one of my articles. Everybody told me I was crazy, and nobody else tried throwing it underhand. I used to be a slow pitch pitcher and never got the overhand throw in football. So everybody does it their own way, but that's happening. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, you can earn Rebel gas cards. It takes $45,000 coin in video poker to earn $100 in gas card, making it 0.225%, almost double points. Basic single points are 0.25%. You can earn up to $175 in Rebel cards Tuesday and the same number Thursday. If you have unredeemed points on Tuesday, you may use them Thursday of the same week, but at Thursday night they evaporate. You can't carry them over to the next week. But because this is a better than average promotion for Tuesday, Thursday, expect the drawing to be tougher. There will be people earning more tickets. The normal PEW of Monday, Wednesday, Friday for the first half of the month is Chow Chow. The first chow is Italian for goodbye, and the second, so it's Italian cookware, or Italian restaurants. You can get the Familia Pizza or Nove Italian Restaurant. On Tuesdays, all right, videopoker.com is going to have a meet and greet Sunday, September 29th at Planet Hollywood. You may get info at videopoker.com/event. I will be attending. There is a $20 sign-up fee, and if you show up, you get $10 free play at Planet Hollywood. All right. We have 10 seconds left, so we thank again Bill Robertie. Thank you, Munchkin. I'm Bob Dancer. Go out and hit lots of royal flushes. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
You've been listening to Gambling with an Edge with your hosts Bob Dancer and Richard Munchkin. Subscribe to the show in iTunes, and episodes will be delivered to you automatically every week. Archived versions of past shows may be found at bobdancer.com and richardmunchkin.com. We welcome emails at gamblingwithanedge@gmail.com. Bob Dancer and Richard Munchkin are both available on Facebook and welcome your questions. The sponsors for the show are the South Point Hotel, Casino and Spa, the M Resort, the Palms Casino Resort, and the website videopoker.com. Join us again next week for another Gambling with an Edge.